Yep. If ever there was a song that personified victory after suffering, it would be that one. If ever there is a song that personifies what Jesus went through for us, to step down from his glory and become flesh, to go through the crucifixion and then the glorious resurrection. Every week, I have no clue when I come in here what special music will be that leads into the sermon, and every week I get an opportunity to hear it, before Sunday school, and ask God, is there any way to segue into the sermon from what you have brought? And I would say this morning that one of the things that we can point to is we're talking about suffering today. And there was no greater suffering that ever took place than what Jesus endured on the cross for us, because not only was he put to death, but he felt the separation from the Father. And he felt the weight of the sin of all mankind upon him. What a great reminder as we go into the second message in the series of the word that Jesus gives to John in prophecy and in the book of Revelation, to the churches and to the church in general. And today speaking to the church in Smyrna. And our key verse this morning will be from the closing of that message, which says, "He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. He who overcomes will not be hurt at all by the second death." As you remember last week when we started this series with the first church in Ephesus, at the conclusion of Jesus' message to each church, there is a admonition that we listen to what he says, and a promise when we do. But leading up to it, there is a reason for the admonition and a reason for us to need that promise. And so we'll look at that today through the church in Smyrna in Asia Minor. There is an old story, and it probably took place in some place more up to the north, or someplace more like northeast Oklahoma than in this area, where it's not quite so flat, but where there's some pretty good hills that you have to keep going over. There was an old farmer that he liked to do things the old way, and he liked to keep his mule and his donkey in use and give it a purpose for living. And so he'd haul stuff back and forth on his farm grounds with a big old buckboard wagon and a donkey. Well, this guy was taking some stuff from one field across the road into another field one morning, and it was just over the crest of the hill. It was a blind field entrance, because it was just over the crest of a hill, right in the middle of a mile square, and the sheriff was coming down through that area, and he was flying low. He's driving a lot like I drive on that road out east of us when we go to Enid, that they've made real nice for driving on. He's flying low, popping over the hills, and this old farmer's a little bit deaf. He didn't see any dust raised. Got a nice little shower like we got this morning. There was no dust being raised. He couldn't see any dust over the hill there. Started across the road, couldn't hear anything, because he's pretty much deaf as a post out his one side and couldn't hear much out of the other. Got halfway across the road, and the sheriff pops over the hill about 60 miles an hour on the gravel. Tries to slam on his brakes, but he can't do a thing, and plows right into the wagon and sends everybody and everything flying. Busts the wagon in two. By the time the sheriff gets his car stopped just short of the ditch down the road, about 200, 300 feet, easy, he started walking back to see if anybody was alive. And the first thing he came upon was the donkey and the donkey had a couple of broken legs. And he bent over and he was saying, "How are you doing, boy?" And he realized that the donkey had broken legs and must be suffering terrible, so he pulled out his revolver and put a bullet right in his head. He walked back a little bit further, and there was the dog. And he bent down, and the dog kind of lifted his head just a little bit, and he could see the dog wasn't doing well. He said, "Are you hurting, boy?" And the dog was whining, and he could see the dog was worse off than the donkey, so he put a bullet right between his eyes. At this point, he walked back, finally come to the farmer. The farmer could feel the blood trickling out of his ear and down his mouth a little bit. Couldn't move his one leg or his one arm. The fellow walked up, the sheriff did. He bent over and he says, "Edgar, you okay?" Edgar says, "I never felt better in my life." Sometimes suffering can be a preferable option in life. But suffering's not anything that we ever go looking for. People that do go looking for it to try to, through some misguided thought, create circumstances where they can be a martyr for God, they're getting ahead of God. God is honored when we go through suffering and glorify Him in it, but He doesn't seek for people to suffer for that end unless that's His plan. It's not for us to decide what life brings. It's us to do the best we can to live life as He would have us live it no matter what. The New Testament writers were very vocal about the positive side of suffering. That seems like an oxymoron, doesn't it? The positive side of suffering. But we know that, and we've said many times, that which doesn't kill us makes us stronger. There's a lot of times that we go through things in life, and God uses it to build our character, to build our faith, and to make a witness of us to other people in that same manner. Peter and Paul both wrote about the joy of sharing in the suffering of Christ in their writings to the churches. Paul went so far in Romans chapter 5, verses 3 through 5, to say that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance, character, and character, hope. And hope does not disappoint us because God has poured out His love into our hearts by the Holy Spirit, whom He's given us. So it's not surprising that Jesus gives John this message on the island of Patmos, a message to a suffering church, but a message that is filled with hope, because there is hope for the hurting in Jesus Christ. The church in Smyrna was another of these Asia Minor churches that were all connected, these 7 churches, with a big circular road. It was another center of commerce. It was another city that had a great natural bay, and so there was a lot of trade. There was a lot of money that changed hands. In fact, although Ephesus and some of the other cities were very prominent cities as well, and we know last week Ephesus is also a cultural center, because of the trade that took place in Smyrna, this was a city that was often dubbed the first city of Asia at that time. It was a center of worship, of pagan worship, of the Greek worship, the Greek gods, the Roman gods. A big temple was built there to one of the Roman gods, or one of the Greek gods. And when emperor worship came into vogue in the Roman Empire, where they would actually deify their emperor and consider him a god, Smyrna was one of the places that was a hub of that kind of worship. And so they were under the thumb of the Roman Empire. Smyrna was a church that underwent incredible persecution, both through Nero in 54 to 68 AD and under Domitian, which would have been about the time that this writing took place by John. John's book is